Hi, welcome back to the Keiser Report. Time now to go to Washington, D.C. and speak with Bill Still, the former newspaper editor and publisher, best-selling author, award-winning documentary, writer, director. His feature-length documentary, The Money Masters, is the 15th most viewed film on the internet in history. He also wrote and directed The Secret of Oz in 2010. Bill Still, welcome, a big welcome to the Keiser Report.
Oh, thank you very much for having me.
All right, Bill Still, as a way into your films, The Money Masters and The Secret of Oz, I want to start by asking a question that will most interest our audience. Is there any gold in Fort Knox? And if not, who took it, why, and how?
No, it was, and incidentally, I detail that in my new book, which is entitled No More National Debt. As far as we know, there's no gold left in Fort Knox. There was one peek into Fort Knox in the 1970s. It was either 1973 or 74, which was instigated by an older friend of mine by the name of Ed Durell. He spent $11 million of his dollars. He was a very wealthy Ohio industrialist trying to answer just this question. So they finally opened the doors. They were forced to open the doors in 73 or 74. There were a couple AP reporters, a couple of congressmen, and there's this famous picture of the director of the Mint, Mary Brooks, standing in front of this wall of gold saying, "Look, it's all here." But the problem was they only showed gold vault number 13, which was the smallest of all the gold vaults, and they denied the existence of the central core vault. The AP reporter and photographer on the scene at the time reported that the gold which they showed had a strange orangish hue, and so therefore that means that it had a high copper content. So probably what this was back in the 70s was the remnants of FDR's call-in of gold coins. It was called coin melt. If they had any good deposit gold, which is .995 gold, the only form of gold that's good for international trade, they certainly would have showed a room full of that. My theory is that despite the fact that the U.S. government carries the largest amount of gold on its books, some 248 million ounces, that they probably have zero, except to some of this remnant coin melt. It was well known at the time, local newspaper coverage of Fort Knox, Kentucky, where the gold was shipped out by rail and truck to the Federal Reserve Bank in New York. We don't know what percentage of it, but at least a large percentage was sent over to London to try to keep down the price of gold during something called the London Gold Pool. And probably once all the gold was cleaned out of Fort Knox, that's when Nixon closed the gold window, and so that's what happened.
Actually, it's funny that we're talking about gold, but you are against a gold standard and instead propose the Monetary Reform Act. So walk us through that.
Yeah, well, the first thing I want to get into is, although I love Ron Paul, the statement that he is making on the campaign trail right now is just absolutely ludicrous. And he claims that, and this is almost a direct quote, that according to the U.S. Constitution, only gold and silver can be money. And that's just not the case, Ron. I don't mind people investing in gold and silver. That's great. I don't mind having gold coins or silver coins as a complementary currency. But what we need is debt-free, government-issued money. And on top of that, you need two basic reforms. Number one, you need to eliminate government borrowing. Number two, you need to eliminate the ability of banks to lend money they don't have. This is called fractional reserve lending. This monetary reform alternative or solution has been known for many generations, and I didn't invent it. It's nothing new. I just rediscovered it, and I'm trying to popularize it.
Bill Still, so what your other aisle might suggest in this debate is that by having the fractional reserve banking system, you bring in something called the money multiplier effect. This creates some velocity in the economy, and people are borrowing, and the GDP is growing. So what do they have wrong?
The problem with the money system is that right now banks can lend 10 to 12 times the money they actually have, and that's if they follow the rules. We found out as a result of the 2008 debacle during congressional hearings here that in fact the big U.S. banks, Morgan and Citibank, were leveraged 52 to 1, Fannie and Freddie were leveraged 72 to 1, and Goldman Sachs was leveraged 333 to 1, and about a year ago President Obama got on TV and said, oh, you know what, we just need to eliminate that nasty old reserve requirement altogether. In other words, 333 to 1 is not sufficient for these banks. Only infinity will do. Now the problem is when you're leveraging money to that extent, once the bubble pops, then you're also leveraging on the way down. In other words, every dollar that comes out of the economy is multiplied then by that multiplication factor, whether it's 10, 12, 52, 72, or 333. So we're going through a major deleveraging of this huge bubble, and the economy absolutely will not come back. That's why you see the specter for the first time of all this money being pumped in by the Fed and it not having the desired result on the economy. We've reached a point for the first time in history called debt saturation. The only way to get out is this monetary reform solution.
Right, you mentioned Ron Paul, and he calls gold and silver the only constitutionally recognized form of money. You're saying that's not really necessarily true, and it brings up these ideas and questions about how money is created in the economy, the relationship in particular between the Treasury and the Federal Reserve Bank. This seems to be the most pernicious and weakest point in the U.S. economy for certain. Could you walk us through how that works in terms of the difference between, let's say, the Treasury just issuing its own money?
First, let's back up a little bit. You said it's not necessarily true. It absolutely is not true, and that's according to no less than 3 Supreme Court decisions. The problem with the Federal Reserve is it merely because it operates under this name, the Federal Reserve System, it's a very thin veneer of a lie, and that's all it is, that the Fed is actually part of the government. And it's designed to make people think that the government is actually controlling or watching over the big banks, when in fact you and I know that there's a revolving back door between the Fed and the big banks. The Fed is a captive of the big banks. The Fed does not create any money, with the exception of QE 1 and 2. All of our money is created as an interest-bearing debt. We are literally, and this is worldwide, we are literally renting every dollar we have in circulation, with the exception of coin money. Now this is a great deal if you can get it for the banks, but it's a horrible deal. Money should serve the public interest. I'm not interested in nationalizing banking, but I am interested in nationalizing money. We need a healthy, competitive commercial banking establishment that does lend at interest, because if you don't charge interest because of the time value of money, there will never be any lending. But banks cannot control the quantity of money, which they absolutely do today.
Okay, over in the UK right now, they're having a big debate whether they should split the banks up between the speculative bank and the utility bank, or the deposit bank, in the relationship. The UK banking industry is lobbying hard that no ring fencing, as they call it. They don't want any ring fencing. It's going to destroy their economy. And yet it sounds like what you're talking about is that there should be a split up of this function in the banking, and there should be a return to some form of banking which is strictly as a utility.
Yeah, absolutely. That function banks should merely be deposit banks and intermediaries between borrowers and lending. Where you really get into trouble is the fact that they can speculate on the market. That only magnifies the problem of fractional reserve lending. But I mean, even splitting up that function is not going to do it, because you still have banks creating 100% of the money, and that's what the problem is. It's not what backs the money that's important. It's who controls the quantity. And the gold bugs incorrectly believe that gold will control the quantity. But on top of that, even if gold would control the quantity, gold certainly won't control the quantity of money under the current system that's lent out by the big banks using fractional reserve lending.
Okay, so presumably the thought here being that gold could simply be used as a fractional reserve as well. There's nothing to stop a fractional reserve banking standard to emerge and repeating the exact same mistakes that we have currently, correct?
Yeah, that's absolutely correct. And even if they followed the rules, they're still at minimum leveraging the money 10 to 12 times. It's not what backs the money, it's who controls the quantity. And if you're sitting in the bank's driver's seat and you are controlling the quantity of a national money, then by de facto you control the political situation as well. Because if the government needs loans and you aren't willing to lend that money, then you are in absolute control of the government, and that's the situation we find ourselves in today. It's a great job if you're sitting in the bank seat, but it's not a good deal for the average person. Money must serve the public interest.
For our Twitter audience who twittered these questions to Max Keiser's Twitter account, a couple of questions. One from VIM Trading. The question is, say Ireland implemented a debt-free money supply, how would Bill Still propose it should be protected from banksters and speculators?
Well, I mean, this is the basic function of government. You either believe that we the people are capable of self-governance, or you don't. And I believe that the reason governments worldwide are seemingly no longer responsive to the voting electorate is because they no longer own the money power. The banks own the money power. So step one is to take back the money power, and then that will allow government freedom from this banker class, or to a much greater degree in any case. And I think that's the first step.
Another question from the Twitterosphere that was popped up on the Max Keiser Twitter account from C. Thaxter to Bill Still. How can people best put through legislation for their own state banks? Legislation for Washington failed, but it's up again in 2012.
What an excellent question, because right now, today, the State Bank of California, a study bill, actually made it through both the upper and lower house of the California Assembly, and now sits on Governor Jerry Brown's desk for signing. I believe it happened about 7 days ago, and he has 12 days to sign it. So there's only about 5 days left to get this signed. Now, that will not implement the state bank. It will implement the very first study commission, giving some money to study the State Bank of North Dakota. And so everybody in California needs to besiege Governor Brown's office at this point. So yes, this can happen, and the first step is to draft legislation so that your state legislatures can apply money to study the Bank of North Dakota model, and they're perfectly willing to help any state.
All right, Bill Still, that's all the time we have. Thanks for being on the Keiser Report.
Thank you.
All right, and that's going to do it for this edition of the Keiser Report with me, Max Keiser, and Stacey Herbert. I want to thank my guest, Bill Still, the director of The Secret of Oz. If you'd like to send me an email, please do so at keiserreport@rttv.ru. Until next time, this is Max Keiser saying bye, y'all.